Let's take a look at this with a simple example of a conditional. We'll talk more about conditionals in the next lesson, but for now, just know that this fourth line of code basically says, only run these two lines of code if this logical expression, my num1 is less than my num2, is true. Or in other words, if my num1 is less than my num2, do the indented lines of code below. So in this first execution, notice that both of our print statements actually were printed. It printed my num2 is greater than my num1, and it printed execution complete. What happens though if we change the values of my num1 and my num2 such that my num1 is not less than my num2? Here we've changed the value of my num1 to 3, and so it's no longer true that my num1 is less than my num2. 3 is not less than 2. When this code runs, we see that only that final print statement, only execution complete, prints. The print statement on line 6 does not run, which means line 6 never ran in the first place. The reason for this is that line 4, this if statement, controls everything that's indented below it. The indentation tells the computer which lines of code are controlled by that conditional. The really important thing here to note is that the line that wasn't indented, the final print statement, still did run. So only those lines of code that were controlled by or indented under that control structure, that if, were controlled by it. Here's a slightly bigger example of this in action. Again, our values are 3 and 2, and so it's false that my num1 is less than my num2. Again, we'll talk about the conditional later. The important thing to note here is this conditional, this control structure, controls all the lines of code indented underneath it. If one of them doesn't run, none of them run. And sure enough, over here, we see again, execution complete is the only output to appear. Lines 5, 6, 7, and 8 all do not run because they were controlled by that one control structure. So in Python, a control structure is any type of code that controls the execution of the lines that are indented underneath it. Controlling the execution could be deciding whether or not they run, deciding how many times they run, or deciding under what conditions they run. But the overall idea is similar. Anything indented in Python is controlled by the line under which it was indented. This organizational method applies to every code structure we'll talk about in this unit. Conditionals, loops, functions, and exception handling all group together lines of code through indentation, and all of them also mark those blocks of code using a colon before the indented block begins.